Welcome, everyone. So we're going to continue with finding out a bit more about the history of the life of Tirumali Krishnamacharya. And I talked about his early childhood experience and the way he was brought up last week. This is now his teenage years. He's 16 years old. And this is about an experience that he had when he was 16. There's a little bit of background you need to know to understand what it's on about at the beginning. So Krishnamacharya is in this lineage of Vishnu worshippers, which is called the Vaishnava Sampradayam. And it's one of the most predominant cults of worship in southern India. And he is in a lineage of great saints from that tradition. So one of the founding saints in that tradition was Namalvar. And Namalvar was a sort of child prodigy. He was born to a family of hunters, and they named him something in Sanskrit. I can't remember the name, but it basically means the oddball, the odd one out. And he was an unusual child. He didn't take his mother's milk. He didn't play with other children. He wasn't really interested in the things that were going on around him. He was just, right from a very early age, kind of just dedicated in one form or another to God. And so kind of an avatar. And his parents had a dream, and in the dream, they were asked to donate Namalvar to a tamarind tree. And so there's this famous tamarind tree, which is sort of an old tree, and it's got a hollow in the bottom of it. And so they took the young child and they put him in the tamarind tree and left him. I get the feeling maybe they were just really glad to get rid of him, get to see the back of him. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, but no, it was more the case that this was considered to be a really auspicious sign that this child was kind of like destined to be some great saint or something. So anyway, that's what they did. They left him in the tree and he just began to meditate. And he was there for some time, nobody knows how long, but he was still a child when a great sage in the north saw a star in the sky and was drawn to follow the star, like the Christ story. And he walks down from southern India and he keeps following the star. And eventually he finds the star shining in the night. He finds that the star is shining directly on this small boy, Namalvar, meditating in the hollow of the tree. And he goes to the child and he can't sort of get him out of his trance. But eventually he manages to ask him some questions about spiritual life and the nature of existence. And the young boy opens his eyes and answers these questions in such a way that the saint realizes that that Namalvar is a realized being, some kind of avatar. And so what he does is he prostrates before him and he becomes the main disciple of Namalvar. And then he goes on as well, because Namalvar doesn't live a long life. He lives to his early 30s or something. And then this saint who had found him goes on to spread this Vaishnava Sampradayam. And so a bit later on, I don't know if anybody really knows the exact dates, but about 800 AD, there's another person in Krishnamacharya's lineage who comes along, and his name is Nathamuni. Now, Nathamuni is another great saint in this lineage. And do I need to tell you much about Nathamuni? Nathamuni was important to Krishnamacharya because he kind of reinvigorated this tradition, which had been virtually lost after all the kind of Mughal invasions of India and a lot of civil war and fighting among the kingdoms in southern India, because each state in southern India would be its own kingdom and have its own king. and there were lots of problems. And because of this strife in that part of India, this cult, this tradition sort of like really kind of went down. It really nearly disappeared, but it was completely reinvigorated by Nathamuni. And so within Krishnamacharya's family tradition, Nathamuni is a big figure. And the thing that you need to remember about Indian culture is that ancestor worship is a really big thing. It's like they know their ancestry, especially in these families, these families that have gone down for a long time in a particular lineage. They know their history, and their past relatives are kind of alive for them in a way. And they have several times a year where they do tarpana, which is a particular practice to honor ancestors. And not just to honor them, but to kind of bring their energy, bring their essence to life. So they're kind of tangible beings, especially if they're saintly beings. And also, it's coming up soon, I think in the next few weeks, there's a period which is really specifically dedicated to ancestor worship in India. So these people would have been, what I'm saying is they would have been kind of like resonant for Krishnamacharya. Okay, now I'll tell you the story. So at the age of 16, Krishnamacharya had a strange dream. In this dream, his ancestor Nathamuni directed him to go to Alvar Tirugari, the small town in the neighboring state of Tamil Nadu, where Maduravaki discovered Namalvar meditating in the hollow of a tamarind tree. This was also where Nathamuni later rediscovered the lost teachings of Namalvar. So this site where the tamarind tree is important. It's like the Bodhi tree where the Buddha was enlightened. It's like a very important place, a tree, and there's a temple there. Krishnamacharya could not ignore the vision and the request of his ancestors, so he gathered together the necessary resources for his journey and set out. A boy of 16 on a mission to find the tamarind tree. In those days, traveling was difficult and distances seemed much greater than they actually were. Mysore is about 600 kilometers from Alvar Trinagari, and Krishnamacharya did not have a motor car or the money to buy a train ticket. But he was not discouraged. He walked in the grueling heat of the sun day after day. He slept under trees or in the tinani, a kind of balcony built at the entrance of houses in those days, mainly for the purpose of providing travelers a place to sleep. When Krishnamacharya arrived at his destination, he encountered an old man seated under a tree. Krishnamacharya told the old man about his dream and asked him where he could find Nathamuni. The old man only moved his head, indicating a particular direction. Krishnamacharya walked in the direction the old man had shown him and soon found himself standing in the middle of a mango grove by the side of the river Tamraparani. Tired and hungry from his long, arduous journey, he fell unconscious. In this state, a trance gripped him, and he found himself in the presence of 3 sages. He prostrated before them and told them of his dream and requested to be instructed in the yoga rahasya. Rahasya means secret. So the secrets of yoga, in the yoga rahasya. Nathamuni, seated between the other two sages, began reciting the verses, and his voice was very musical. When the discourse was over, Krishnamacharya opened his eyes to find that there was no grove, and the sages were gone. But he remembered every single one of the verses that Nathamuni had chanted. Krishnamacharya ran back to tell the old man what had happened. The old man smiled and said, You are very lucky to have received the Yoga Rahasya. Now go inside and offer your prayers to Lord Vishnu to thank him for his benevolence. Krishnamacharya ran into the temple that had been erected to Lord Vishnu at this sacred site and offered his prayers. When he went back outside, the old man was gone. As Krishnamacharya stood there recalling the incident in the mango grove, it slowly dawned on him that the old man who had directed him to the grove and then to the temple resembled the sage who has recited the verses to him in the trance. It was only then that he realized that he had received the Yoga Rahasya from Nathamuni himself. Later in his life, it became clear to Krishnamacharya that this incident had been a test of his commitment to yoga, as well as a directive from both Namovar and Nathamuni to spread the teachings of yoga. Just as Namovar and Nathamuni established the Sri Vaishnava Sampradayam and worked to ensure that the tradition remained strong and vibrant, Krishnamacharya would go on to revive the teachings of yoga and provide the yoga tradition with a strong, revitalized base from which to grow and spread. And so, that's why we're here. So, the interesting thing, this is Nathamuni's Yoga Rahasya. So this Krishnamacharya, you have to remember also that he was a great scholar, and the way everything was learned in those days was through repetition and memory. So he had an amazing ability to remember scripture and sutras. He remembered what Nathamuni recited to him, chanted to him. He went home and he wrote it down in what would be Telugu, which is the native language, Tamil language. And his son, Desikachar, TKV Desikachar, translated that and produced this book for the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandarin in Chennai. And the book isn't what you would expect. When I first used to hear about this book, I expected it to be some kind of spiritual treatise of some form about Vaishnava, the Sampradayam, the worship of Vishnu and Krishna. It honors them, but essentially it's a textbook on Hatha Yoga. And it talks about the postures, it names the postures, it talks about the benefits of the postures for health, it talks about the pranayamas, it talks about yoga for all the different stages in your life, as a young person, as a householder, as an older person, as a retired person, and someone who's preparing to death and great samadhi. But also, interestingly, considering that he composed it in 800 and something AD, talks about what yoga for women quite extensively, and it talks about yoga in pregnancy and the importance of the fact that yoga should be practiced by women. And in this particular version, it's the only version, not this particular version, but you can see this Desikachara has had the postures that he's talking about illustrated, and along with the text. So it talks about a lot of the postures. It doesn't just talk about the postures, it says why you should do the postures, what are the benefits of the postures, and what postures should be done. But it's a very interesting book, and it's not a very well-known book. It's not a major scripture that is known, but this book was the springboard for what Krishnamacharya went on to do next in his life. And really the inspiration that he he took the inspiration from this encounter, from this experience, from this shamanic, mystical experience to drive himself forward, not just as a great scholar, an Ayurvedic physician in India, but as a yogi. And it was because of this book that he decided, and because it actually states in here that part of what he says is that it's not enough to study. Intellectual study is not enough. Scripture's not enough. It's not enough just to be devotional. You have to practice hatha yoga. And so Krishnamacharya then needed to find the hatha yoga teacher that was going to give him this knowledge. And that hatha yoga teacher no longer existed in India at that time. And so what Krishnamacharya does next, you'll find out next week. It's always good to leave it on the edge, isn't it? So at the moment, I'm really into Korean cinema. Yeah, I love Korean dramas. And it's a kind of, I shouldn't really admit this, it's becoming a bit of an addiction. I've got to cut it out at some point. But I just really love Korean dramas. And I've been watching them. And what they are just so brilliant at is like, they really, really draw you in, and they get you right to the point where it's something really amazing is going to happen. You just have to know. And then it goes, da, 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 and all fades out. And you go, oh, no. And I just thank God for Netflix is all I can say. Because if I had to wait till next week, I don't know what I'd do. But anyway, so yeah, the story's a bit like that. I'm not really addicted as well. I just like them. So beautiful. So just so beautiful. Namaste.